anything now? There should be like ambient right now. Yeah. Turn it up or. Okay, so you know what? We can when we start, we can adjust it. Like, I mean, I'll look at you if I need more, and then I'll ask. And then once I'm inside, like I can adjust. Yeah. Except for maybe the second map. I have to go to that map. We'll see. I'll just look at it.
We'll play by ear.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So. Oh, the internet issue? Okay, sure. Do you want to introduce though?
Hello. Yes, that makes my voice even stronger than it is. My name is Ifat. So this is the first of two panels that has to do with player agency, glitches, and mod. My interest in creating this track is sort of to talk about code and game system and how it can connect to social and political systems. So this panel will have three speakers. The first one is Tamara. Yeah, and sorry, I didn't ask for your name. Yeah, and she will introduce her stuff much better than me, so I'll let her do it. Then we have Alex Leach, and the third one is Lindy, and she will be Skyping in. So thank you for coming, I guess. I'm a little bit awkward. And yeah, you're...
Thanks, Yifat. Thank you for having me, and thank you to Different Games. This is a wonderful experience, wonderful conference. I'm very happy to be here. Okay, so my name's Tamara Yadao, and I'm an artist who works with game engines to build sound machines for improvisational music performance. And algorithmic composition. So I'm going to show you, my presentation, which is in Little Big Planet today. And I'm going to demonstrate some of my instruments and interfaces. And I'm going to contextualize all of that within my creative practice from an aesthetic standpoint. So without further ado, there will actually be, just FYI, a short break between, not like a break where we get up and leave, but a break of like a moment or 20 seconds or so between maps because I have to load another one. Okay. How many people are familiar with Little Big Planet just off the cuff? Excellent. Wow. Okay. So you'll see a lot of familiar stuff, of course. If anybody uses Little Big Planet 3 with a PS3, you probably understand this long load time too, so. Okay. So I am going to play this in preview mode, even though it's in create mode at the moment. And but you are going to get to see some of the guts of it as I jump out of one of my last instruments and fly around. Okay. Could I have a little more volume, please? Thanks. Okay, just a little more volume. So this is a soundscape I made that's spread across the space and is composed. Normally in real time I have a system of cameras where I move back and forth across the composition and make my own improvised choices. Right now the computer's playing it though, so I can talk to you. So on some level this is a little bit of a performance art collaboration right now. But it just works on a system of programmed sound objects. So let's get to agency, shall we? I think the thing that's important to talk about when it comes to agency is that I began to think about what gives it meaning, because coming from like a performing arts perspective, nobody ever really talks about agency because it, inherently constitutes the process of the performance, right? So this started making me think about, why is it different in this case and what's meaningful about it. So in order to understand improvisation in the context of a game space, I think it's important to, make a distinction between just very basic rules of goal-oriented gameplay that everybody will be familiar with, right? So, okay. So, obviously when we think about goal-oriented gameplay, we think about goals, right? But the thing about it that's important to note is that these goals are very, very specific, right? And they work in conjunction with mechanisms that move, a plot or ostensibly a narrative forward, either through a scoreboard or what have you. And that within this framework, there are all these little sub-goals that serve a larger goal, right? So obviously, the string of pearls, innings, quarters, laps, levels, all of these things, right, contribute to the idea of moving a very controlled set of specified goals forward towards its end. And this, of course, is achieved with combinations of button presses and what have you on a controller. So when it comes to improv now, it's not that these two things are necessarily unrelated or dissimilar, but they're more differentiated by their contexts, I think. Improv, I'm not really going to go back, through the history of where it came from, but I think that the thing that I find really interesting about it is that it's this very sort of prelingual, prehistoric action that I think, dates back to just early forms of human expression, in that they are instinctual. And natural. So having said that, I'd like to kind of frame, my next discussion of the aspects of improv and performance. So again, there are combinations of button presses that achieve the goals, but in this case, there are usually less, the goals are less specified, and in this case tend to be more aesthetic. So, in other words, you can set up an algorithmic system set, on parameters, based on parameters, and come up with results that are more focused on the potential of the system and not just a one-dimensional thing. So these looser strictures encourage experimental and imaginative play, okay? And like I was just saying, the goal is, not so specified, and in a way it still is, you could still call it a game mechanic, I think, but it has just a really abstract goal. It's not, get from point A to B to get to C. And again, I was saying, so improvisational performance and gameplay, are similar things, I think, in terms of their agency, but they're differentiated by their contexts. Okay. So I just want to end this to say that, the improviser in this case is an agent of play in a game space just as she is in a musical performance, I think. So now I'll move ahead into showing you some of my instruments. This next discussion is going to be more about about user-computer collaboration, in the sense that I've built these objects to perform on their own on a counter system and a system of scales and intervals, and when they're activated. That one is currently glitching out because it's just kind of in constant, I think, impact with that piece of glass, even though it's just laying there and not really moving. But then I decided to add another variable of the odd sock avatar, which was really fun because I actually don't use the avatars like, you know, right out there in the performance. I usually throw them in the controlinator like I did at the beginning. But let's have him kind of interact here and see what happens. He moves around, it gets more and more cacophonous. So those counters are moving each time they impact with either him or the walls or the structure. Decided, well, you know, I could let him go on, but I think I need to end it. So I just decided to give these objects gravity and see what happens. So in that case, that was just sort of this demonstration of one of the algorithmic structures that I've made. This is another one, which is different, though. This involves actually more playing the instrument itself and the computer responding, you know, setting its own sense of the harmonies from what I play. So this is called the floatophone. So all of the harmonies coming off of those tones are activated once I trigger one of these buttons on the controller, and those, you know, it's mapped, basically. Those of you who have used Little Big Planet understand how the controlinator works. Okay, and then the last instrument I want to show you is not so much about the algorithmic setup, as much as it's about sort of performing with the instrument and trying to get the computer to respond in a particular way. So let me jump out of the controlinator, and now you can see the map. There are my slides. And here's my Flotrillium, which I'm going to only play a little bit of it for you. It's like 6 levels, but... Okay, so let me take this out of preview mode. Okay. Okay. All right, so... get just a hint more volume? Thanks. Alright, so let me just speed this up a little. So the thing that's interesting about the way this works is that those are all sound objects on sequencers, and you know, the more input obviously I give to the machine, the more clicks you'll probably hear over time, because there's only so much polyphony, so many tones of polyphony that the computer can produce. Is that loud enough? I can't really hear it out there. Yeah? Okay. And, you know, the plan eventually is to, you know, have this set up on a system without the avatar that allows me to turn things on and let, you know, turn some of the system on and then let the computer determine which ones it chooses. So the cool thing about this too is that the camera work really allows for spatialization too of the audio, so that's really fun in performance. Okay, so let me just get up here, and then we'll move to the next map. Okay. I get that a lot. About the spacing and the complexity. Okay. So the last map I'm going to show you, I'm going to show you these three instances of this demonstration of particle synthesis I did. Each one of these pods is like a demonstration of what I like to think of as like this spectrum of glitch behavior where, you know, the system is algorithmic, but then, you know, there are, because the programming can get so complex, here, let me load that. You know, patterns of emergent behavior become clear. You know, stuff that wasn't programmed in, but just, you know, the response of the machine, basically. And then the third instance is just going to show like a total, you know, my attempt at overloading the system to get a more fully realized glitch that drops in frame rate, etc. So. Ooh. Oh, you know what? I forgot. I'm in play mode. No, I'm not. Whoop. There. Okay. Am I okay in time? Okay. Thanks. I'm not going to say much. I'll just go through these, and you can ask me afterwards if you'd like. Okay, so. Basically introduced one chaotic system into another, being the rendering of the water in game space, which all of you know is a difficult simulation to achieve. There's a clustering effect that comes about on occasion. And when these things, just kind of go off on their own, that wasn't programmed. Okay, and then we'll look at this last one real quick. Okay, I've run out of time, so thank you.
Hello? Okay, so the internet is dubiously out, which means that you all get Undertale spoilers faster. If you are worried about Undertale spoilers, you should leave, because I'm going to talk about it. Okay, that's the only content warning I feel I need to put on this talk. Okay, so this is my talk, Glitch, Breakage, and Texture in Interactive Art. I think when I pitched this talk, I told... Oh, great, I can't even see my notes privately. Okay, well, whatever. When I pitched this talk, I think I said I was going to talk a little bit about level design, but as I started to do my research, I got way more interested in what it means when things break and when people break things on purpose, and where breakage can be incorporated into your practice to make your stuff more interesting, basically. So that's what this talk is about. Here is the mandatory cat GIF. Now you have seen it. This is my perception of the internet. I am professionally a software developer and consultant, and I do lots of work with things that break all the time in ways that are interesting and are less interesting. So yes, to me, the internet is one cat endlessly puking rainbows on another cat forever. Let's talk a little bit about Glitch. So, Glitch is really interesting because it had its big moment like 2 or 3 years ago, and then it has kind of become incorporated into everybody's working practice as sort of the natural texture of the internet, because things keep breaking down, right? Like, we are now in a world where lots of interesting things can happen that are bad that will come up later in the talk. Glitch is so much a texture of the world that it has become kind of the way that you mark a really interesting art game, even when it's a AAA game. So this is a screenshot from Saints Row 4. Butts in video games is a different talk, so I'm not giving that talk. But what this is a picture of basically, it's basically like glitched out software models that they destroyed and then incorporated as actual practical models. So software famously breaks. You can just read my notes now. Anyway, it is okay. I'm gonna try and maybe just actually hit this as a presentation on a separate screen, but I'm not sure if it's gonna work. I just want to see if I can see. No, I can't. Great. Okay. That's a little bit distracting, but whatever. Maybe I should print them. So software famously breaks. It breaks in lots of interesting ways. It can break in ways that are more combative or less combative towards developers. This is an example of where developers have started to incorporate glitch into their actual character models and their actual practice of work. Glitch is an aesthetic. This is an image glitch with intent. It represents a choice on my part to undermine the ideas of what a coherent digital photo looks like. So we think of digital photos as being a reliable representation of something, like they're a picture on paper, but they're not. They're like the ultimate ceci n'est pas une pipe. It is not actually what it is. And what glitch does is it lets you destroy an image to be more interesting to look at and more interesting to explore, to piece together. Some filters, which all glitch is a type of filter that focuses on breaking things. So there are some filters that are made meticulously to bring together a world. They give you the affect of Moon Hunters or Hyperlight Drifter, and it's a very coherent affect. It's that lovely, dreamy sort of representation. Glitch is a different one. It's intended to convey a type of authenticity by representing what the internet actually is, right? It's like the hackers scene. You all seem very young to remember hackers, but watching all of the numbers drift out of the screen at a dude, right? Because dudes typing on the internet is very boring. It's difficult to convey. So glitch can be characterized as in any medium as the medium when it has been pushed to its limit to which it breaks, at which point it becomes the aesthetic, and the crack is how the light gets in. That is an even older reference. It's from before when I was young. So here's an example of glitch. This is Black MIDI. A classic example of the glitch aesthetic is, it predates gaming by a wide margin. It's the sound of an electric guitar. The sound of an electric guitar isn't the sound that the electric guitar was going for. That's the sound of a guitar. The sound of the electric guitar is what happens when you hit a distortion pedal, which breaks the sound of the guitar entirely. This is an image of Black MIDI. Black MIDI is what happens when you push electronic music too far. It becomes impossible to repeat by human hands. You have to collaborate with the computer to have that affect in place. You extend yourself through the computer, and the computer gives back a thing that would be broken if a human was accurately trying to reproduce it. I'm not super into Black MIDI, but there are lots of people who are. It's a really interesting thing to just read up on. Here is another example of where you have collaborated with a machine to destroy the world. And I like AAA games, which I like them because they really represent this effort at a coherent ideology of games. And I love it when people try for a coherent ideology, because the harder they try for it, the less coherent it gets. Breaking Madden, specifically the year that the Seahawks destroyed the Broncos, was the best year. So glitch can be found in sports, in drug testing, and in like this desperate effort to sort of cohere beyond a point of human breakage, or in Breaking Madden. So this is an annual series where Cam Newton stacks an electronic squad so badly that they just start to fail in interesting ways. Like the players will fall over, they'll start doing weird plays that aren't intended by the game. It's just really interesting. But it's not what we commonly think of as a glitch aesthetic, because this doesn't look like a broken photograph. It's a system that's been pushed to the limit at which the computer breaks down. So breaking down the simulation, it can destroy the idea of a game that can and should be a narrative effort on par with cinema. The idea of Madden is you go through and you play the Super Bowl inside your computer like you're a football player. That's a coherent idea. It's a daydream of perfection, which glitch kind of moves to break. And by breaking it, you're forced to engage a little bit further with the system you are actually in. So the next one is, this is the doll eyes Easter egg from Bloodborne. It could be perceived as a glitch. If you slide your camera around at just the right angle, you can see inside a player's head. The lore has lots of information about eyes looking up towards God, because Bloodborne, it's a JRPG, God, it's in there. I had a great joke about God. It's about Mario 2, and how Mario 2 is like the Gospel of John of video games. It's the chapter where the physics get really, really strange, and it turns out it came from a totally different source. Come talk to me after if you like complicated jokes about Christianity. Game developers face interesting media development problems. We have to build kind of a linear game narrative, or a purposefully non-linear game narrative, but that means that the linearity is still there, just it's in the other, on the other side of the coin. You have to still think about the movies, because everybody, for the sake of funding, we have to have an external reference to our field to talk about. So, where was I with that? Make everything too complicated, and you risk players never seeing the majority of your work, right? Like, this is a common problem in branching narratives. You have a whole chapter, no one ever sees it. 2,500 words lost. Every additional piece of complexity makes it more likely that a system will break. Every time you add a joint, it's more likely something's gonna break. The mechanical components might go down. Bloodborne's mechanics are a combination of JRPG grind and fighting game, but it makes use of environmental storytelling to get its point across. A lot of the story is told by having corpses instead of having moving parts, because corpses don't have agency. They're dead. They just sit there. And you, the player, get to interact with it. There's a wonderful article on Killscreen about this right now, I think. It might actually be on Giant Bomb. So, where am I going with this? Where I'm going with this is that this idea of the coherent whole is not just from video games. It's actually from something called neoliberalism, or as we would know it, late-stage capitalism, which is an idea that a coherent surface forms that has a pure system of interaction, which is legible. A legible system of interaction is one that can be translated into things like maps. So whenever you use Google Maps to see what's around you, if you look at the map instead of using your eyes, what you're doing is participating in a system whereby information has been rendered legible. To render information legible, you have to sanitize it. You have to make it coherent. It comes in blocks, you interact with it in blocks, and the more you interact with something in legible blocks, the more likely it is you can be put into a loop which has a profit structure built into it, right? So a coherent profit structure is why every time you see a new piece of technology demonstrated by one of the stacks, you see it demonstrated ordering a Domino's pizza. Never anyone else's pizza, always Domino's pizza. That's because Domino's has a really highly mechanized food chain and agrees with it, but unlike McDonald's, it has a whole bunch of options. So there's lots that goes into that, but what's happened is that Domino's Pizza provides a really great legible interface for demonstrating a certain type of technology. You probably wouldn't use that to order soup dumplings from some random place down by Canal, right? Like, that's not the interface. Domino's is legible. When you order that, you're participating in an information ground that is readable. How does glitch have anything to do with that? Well, when the Domino's Pizza app breaks, you don't really notice it because it's invisible. It doesn't draw attention to itself. It's designed to fail, silently, more or less. Maybe you get your money back. What does this have to do with Paris? So, when I was talking about Hyperlight Drifter and Moon Hunters, I picked those games on purpose because those are games of exploration. And Paris is the home of the original game of exploration. It's called Fleneurship. And what happened is just, Paris is super old. And it was designed largely before cars and before things were outside of the scale where you would have to engage with machinery to explore an area. It's a lot of humanity piled on top of humanity, which I am from Canada, I am from Toronto, we don't have that there. We have been built largely after the car, which means executing Fleneurship in Toronto is an extremely limited activity that can take up about maybe 5 days if you're real committed in the middle of the downtown core. You can certainly execute it elsewhere. Very different than exploring the way you would explore in Saints Row or the way you would explore in a sandbox game. So in his book, The Other Paris, Luc Sant includes a chapter entirely about exploration and Fleneurship called The Game. The Game is the exploration of the city. It's a walking about game that probably only ever made sense before we started tearing things down. Cities are built on top of themselves. I think I covered that. Basically, Paris used to be super illegible, and so was Singapore, and so was New York, and so were a lot of places. Fundamentally, you didn't quite know what was going on. But as we've moved forward into neoliberalism and maps and Yelp, we've noticed that Fleneurship has come back in the form of exclusivity and secrets, but it's still hard to engage in that sense of glitched out, like, I'm just going to go on an adventure, because you can always find yourself wherever you are. It's not so hard now that we have GPS. So game levels that are built to emphasize grandeur participate in this. They participate in this, like, capitalist structure of the great big buildings and the wonderful, that sense of wonder and impressiveness, instead of participating in the sense of lesser exploration, which I think is more meaningful to people. I'm totally open to fighting about this over beers later, by the way. This is just an idea that I'm having, that I was given freedom to talk about. So a sense of safety and privacy is important when you're trying to build exploration games, especially ones that are going to break, because people engage better when they have smaller spaces to explore. This is backed by research mostly into casino design, where they thought that having great big open casino floors would make people engage better with the slot machines, and it turns out no. You actually have to have misdirection. You have to have paths people can't see the end of. People have to feel a little bit boxed in order to feel like something's got their back. In order to engage in a flow state, which is where you drop out of consciousness in order to participate in a series of small goals being earned, which is what many, many video games try to do, to get people to do that, you have to make them feel safe first. And the best way to do that is to provide a contained space on screen. So, branches, trees, you wall in at least one area of the screen at all times. There's always something new on every screen of your game to lead people along in the path. I feel that that is the basic essence of Flirnership. So, moving back, however, to the glitch topic, was video games do not generally build on top of themselves the way that cities do, with the notable exception of speedruns and custom hacks that have been put together, like Mario Must Die, a hack of Super Mario World. This is Item Abuse by Pangea Panga. The hacks of games get taken down by corporations because they emphasize the illegibility of the game. They provide a private language for people who care deeply about the game to provide a kind of slang. You couldn't write a game like this without really understanding how the mechanics of Super Mario work. You have to have been embedded in Super Mario World to know where to bounce the player. And even so, I think that the guy who wrote this level took 3 years to beat it, going frame by frame with an emulator. He did save states. So, without being legible, that is produced by an authorized tool, the levels are of no perceptible benefit to the companies that feel they own them. But it's hard to say who owns a city. Who owns the places you spend time in? Is it you? Is it the corporation? This is a big question right now because the internet, of course, is not a not a public space. It's a private public space. So, how to solve Hypercube? This is a game. This is the part where I talk about level design a little bit. I might go a very small amount over, but not hugely. So, Hypercube was a level that was built in Mario Maker that took advantage of a glitch in Mario Maker to make a level that was unbeatable without using Mario Maker to look at how the level was built. This is what I mean by further engagement with the game. So what you see here is that those two stones, they were hiding things that would change into coins when you hit a POW block. But the guy who was playing this level, he could not figure it out until he left the flow state of playing Mario to play Mario Maker and explore what had happened to glitch out the level. This level was illegal on Mario Maker. Nintendo almost instantly took it down because it took advantage of the break in the system. Despite the fact that it promoted a further player engagement, that it was using a puzzle inside the software itself, it was taken down because it was not legible to the corporation. It didn't promote what they wanted, which was a level that you play through with Mario. It promoted a question about the game itself. Presumably it was also too difficult for anyone to beat, it didn't get any stars, etc. So how is this about neoliberalism? The City of London, a corporation almost entirely used to shove capital around the world without being traced, it has a huge number of glass boxes. They become uninhabitable in an hour if they're not hooked to a central electricity grid. So they have generators. There are ways for these systems to support themselves, but what they understand is things like the internet will always be available. That's a great big question. It's not actually true, right? They understand the coherence of this surface, this glass box surface, which once very fundamental things about grids get wiped out, they're not reliable anymore. If there were no air AC in this building, we would have to leave, even on a day like this, because it would become too hot to be in it. When there's no support for your Wi-Fi login to your World of Warcraft account, your world becomes empty and the game itself is destroyed. So I think it's more interesting to work through what it means to participate deeply in systems than it means to engage with only the surface of systems, is why I put that slide in. Also, I just think the skyscraper fact is super interesting in New York and that you should all read that book. So what does it mean to go from this? This is Earthbound, of course, to this, which is Aaron from Undertale. It's almost purely about agency. It's about choice and how you choose to engage with the system. To this, which is, of course, the final boss of Undertale. That's a very different aesthetic there. And the thing is that what Undertale does is, of course, it destroys itself as you play. It wipes itself out. You have to choose to keep booting the system and engaging with the fact that you're running a piece of software and saving a game over itself to get the good ending. And even then, when you restart the game, it doesn't have a lost memory, it remembers you. If you f up the first time around, it knows. It's a really creepy and interesting affect that's only possible because the team working behind it took advantage of this glitch state, making you interact with software as it truly is, instead of software as we perceive it to be. And that makes it very different than Earthbound, which it had the same overall affect of. Earthbound, it maintained a coherent surface that talked to the real world, but it didn't break in a fundamental way as you went through it. This is a slide about art games, and my favorite part about this slide is right down there at the bottom. It says, Windows Avast antivirus software thinks this game is a virus. So this is by Andy McClure. It's from Ludendare 2014. Hi, Andy. I told you. My favorite part about things breaking because we're trying to protect ourselves too much from them breaking is that this is going to keep happening as we make games that are not recognized by major corporations. But major corporations tend to not recognize the contributions of their communities. So how this conversation goes forward is very important for games that have variety in them, that exhibit difference, because difference is often seen as a shattering of the system. And shattering the system to make it illegible is actually what we're trying to do most of the time. Anyway, this talk can get even bigger, but I think this is a good place to stop. Glitch destroys a player's flow state. A player's experience with the game is a complete interface, and it's an excellent way to encourage people how to think more deeply and in a more human way about the available systems to them. Think about the real system, not the sort of system. The ability to break free of the flow, to solve a puzzle, or to engage, rather than to engage solely with a rote mechanic to score points, is what differentiates video games as art from video games as slot machines. And that's an important difference. That's an important policy difference, because when we're only scoring points, we become legible to the system. Becoming purely legible to the system almost inevitably leads to a point where, like, free-to-play games are the way forward, and free-to-play games are a slot machine. Addiction is characterized as the unmaking of self, and Glitch offers a straightforward way to snap people out of the flow state of a game and think about what an author is trying to say with the mechanics and the game itself. It is not merely an aesthetic, but a mechanic in and of itself, one that offers reflection on how things are made and how to be seen as human in a slick glass world. The reason I used the Easter egg forest scene from Chrono Trigger is because there's an entire secret world behind this, and if you miss it, then you never get to see the forest rebuilt. It becomes a giant desert, there's a black hole in the middle, and it stays that way forever. And there's only like 1 or 2 chances maybe to fix it. In a game that has like, 13 to 21 endings still on the wall in the library is like the canonical JRPG. I really like it because I think Undertale and Chrono Trigger do a lot of things with each other. So that's it. The slick glass world is beautiful. It offers no room for the grit that breaks down the machine. The grit is inevitable. We're facing a world where failure to update WordPress has managed to bring down the Prime Minister of England. So, I think that pretending the glitches don't exist, or that they're not important, or that they're not a good thing to think about is past. I think we should really consider this going forward. I believe that glitch is actually itself our most contemporary art form. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, I'm seeing stuff.
we good? All right. So a little bit about me to start. I'm an artist, cyborg, and educator. So I deal. Cybernetics and
That's NYU. Hey. Let's see. Lindy? Okay, I think what we're gonna do is do a probably a Q&A and I'll start looking at the audience if they're unnecessary. So if Tamara and Alex want to come in, we'll do a 15-minute. Okay, so if anyone has a question,
No, no, I haven't. Um, uh, you know, with the kinds of things that I build, it's never boring. In fact, if anything, it's constantly a struggle, because I think that, I just think that the Little Big Planet, for example, is not meant to, build these weird sound machines. I don't think. And so, because of that, problems arise, and part of it is a matter of trying to get to the simplest way always of how to say something to try and avoid it. But that's always the challenge. So on that front, it's never boring. Using a tool for the purpose, repurposing a tool, I think is key, at least for me. And that's what keeps it interesting, recontextualizing it.
I like to make sure experiences fit into 140 characters or less in sort of a metaphorical way. My primary work is building art robots, and when I'm not building art robots, I like to build video games about things like fighting with your roommates about the dishes through a balance mechanic. So my games are intended to get boring if you play them too fast, because they're basically, or if you play them for too long, because they're just sort of interest mechanics that are jokes about contemporary life. I also once built a flamethrower that shot rainbows. It took like 4 years to build and is really carcinogenic and super dangerous. So almost all of my work is sort of a joke about being a person, because I think that being a person is just a really funny problem.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think looking for something that's obviously interesting, or a dilemma, a personal dilemma, like being a person.
I love working out the walls of the problem. So that's why I'm a systems developer, because I like working out where the system should go and what it should look like, which means that I figured out things like every screen should have something interesting on it. That's actually a game design rule from Legend of Zelda, but it still works. It's really important. And I like finding the minimum number of elements when I'm building a procedural generation that will make the game recognizable as what it is itself. I have 3 art degrees. Ask me anything.
I think, yeah, I mean, it's just, I think it would be important too, because I honestly didn't start on the gaming end of this at all. You know, I'm a multimedia artist, but, you know, I'm a musician and a composer. And so I came to, you know, the idea of working with game engines because of algorithmic pieces that I was making and looking at. So that's how I think that kept it interesting for me. Is how can I expand, you know, my field of tools, you know?
You're welcome. Would anybody else like to ask a question? I know that I put entirely too many thinks into a 15-minute talk. This happens when I don't write enough. Guest first, you, sir. Person.
What is the significance of labeling a piece of art a game or not? Was that the question? I mean, for my own work, I don't need it to be called a game. If somebody calls it a game, then that's interesting to me, because I, you know, consistently feel like I'm recontextualizing, you know, what I do in terms of sound practice and, you know, using the space to expand on, you know, methods of generating sound. I don't like labels, to be honest with you. I like limitations in the creative process. That's another thing that I think would be useful in not keeping it boring. But yeah, I don't like limitations. I mean, I like limitations in the context of, you know, the creative process sometimes, but I don't like to use labels a lot, especially with my work. So.
And I see games as one more really interesting system to solve. I love puzzles. So when I play a fighting game, I want to figure out what the puzzle that's going into the mechanics is. And that means that I really enjoy figuring out the whole MDA. Robin Hunicke's wonderful way of talking about game design is, to me, the best way to conceptualize interactive new media, because I spend a lot of time building lots of different things that all want your attention, and they want it in specific ways. So for me, when I interact with other systems, that's what I'm looking for. Unless I am applying for a Canada Council grant, it does not matter to me whether or not people think my work is a game. And the moment that it does matter, most of my work just changes its colors like a chameleon and becomes a game, because there's usually a point. Like, there's an end point to most of the work that I engage in. And I think that there are certain formal structures that can set things up as being games. Again, they're mostly useful to refer to when I'm playing the game, will I get grant money this year? It's a very engaging first-person shooter.
Yes, that's true. Understanding the parameters of how to acquire funding is very important. So, yes. Yeah, I think that's a question for you.
Okay. So when I was younger, I really needed things to be black and white. I had to have them be black and white, and Chrono Trigger was my favorite game, as you can tell, because it's still in my slides and it's been more than 20 years. I am now old, and when I have a meal, it's okay if I don't like it. I will try something new just because it's new, and it's okay if it turns out to have eggplant and makes me violently sick. I don't mind a little bit of preaching. I'll set aside the time. But I also have a really great network of people who are curious, and they will tell me what games I should be interested in, and I rely on them pretty heavily. And Undertale I ignored straight up until my 13-year-old sister dropped just like a pound and a half of fan art about Sans on me, and I was like, okay, you're the weirdest kid I know, except me. Why don't I play this? So I think that things, as you move through being bored and media and like the Avengers being the only heavily funded animated film, but Zootopia having better ideas, like as you go through more forms of media, eventually patience for the 2 hours of your life wasted by something just preaching at you that didn't speak to you becomes an experience you're willing to indulge for the rare times that something that you really thought wasn't for you became great and became key to your experience. Like, I did not really want to read an entire book about Paris to get to the game chapter, but holy crow, like, Paris was on fire for the entirety of the 1800s. That's super interesting. Like, man, read broadly. You'll get bored otherwise.
Okay. Next question. Sure.
Okay. Hello.
Oh, hi.
Hopefully now it'll be good. No one saw my ear.
All right, should I start from the beginning?
Yeah, you have 20 minutes.
All right. All right, so I'm going to talk about subverting the gender paradigms of learning code. So just a bit about myself. My name is Lindy Wilkins. I'm an artist, cyborg, and educator. So a lot of my artwork revolves around technology and how to engage with technology in our everyday lives, merging technology with our bodies, and also teaching people on how they can build things. I do a lot of teaching of code in community and informal makerspaces. I work with a collaborator, Hillary Predko, on our project Little Data. So we're creative technologists for social change, and what we try to do is find ways to teach people about technology and how to engage with their world in different kinds of ways. So attacking the problem from different angles outside from the traditional avenues of education and learning.
So your screen isn't shared.
Sorry?
The screen isn't shared.
Okay, one sec. It says it's shared.
Okay, we'll just have you talk and you can send, we'll send the presentation on Twitter.
Okay.
I'd rather you talk.
Yeah, I'll just talk then. All right, so one sec, sorry. Yeah, so basically, I'm going to talk a little bit about learning code. There's a big problem that a lot of us are aware of with lack of women in representation in STEM fields, and particularly programming. And I work with kids a lot, and I'm going to kind of talk about how that starts at a young age and how we can kind of subvert that. So in 2013, 30,000 US students took the advanced placement test for computer science. Less than 20% were female, and actually in a few states, not a single female student actually even took the test. So that's a big problem for me, you know, and like there's definitely a problem with representation, but like how can we start to catch these things early? And the reason I want to do this is because I really feel like we need to hear the voices within programs of women, not only outside on the surface creating games that talk about things that are relevant to us as humans, but like learning how to take things apart and mod existing things and kind of subvert those narratives for our own purposes.
Okay, this is very sad.
Is education, and the idea behind this is that we have project-based learning that project-based learning that allows people to explore things. Hello?
Yeah. It's
Am I
just
still-
for a second. You can do it, Lindsay. I have like.
Am I still there?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna turn off my camera. That might help.
Yeah.
I'm not even looking at you, so I'm gonna turn it off. All right. So yeah, maker education is a big buzzword, and people are really using this to talk about how we can get more diverse people engaged, and you know, a big problem with this is the content in those things. They're all made by the same types of people, learning the same types of things, and certainly we do need more diverse projects happening and more diverse project content. But I actually believe the problem goes beyond that, and it goes into unconscious bias that we have with our kids and how we allow them to learn. So I work with kids very often. Their parents bring them into a technology space I work with called STEAM Labs. And they tell me all kinds of things about their kids before they get there. They like to tell me their kids' interests. They like to tell me their kids' strengths. And it's these kinds of things that provide opportunities for their kids to learn in different ways. So a parent has the opportunity to recognize computer skills early in a child and put them in one stream or another. And we read these markers differently based on gender. So people often tell me that their boys like computers because they like Minecraft. So they put them in their code programs because they see them engage with computers. And they often tell me that their girls do not like computers, and they have a lot of attention to process and detail. And I actually believe these are the same skills, and they're being read differently based on the gender of kids. So the way we choose career is very male-centric, and we're not reading markers for potential very high skills of programming the same way we do in boys as we do in girls. And I believe the actual the problem with this is STEM or STEAM, and this has been really put as the answer to a lot of these problems, where we need to start teaching people about science, technology, art, and math. But I'll take you through what each of those mean to me. To me, science means the exploration of how the world works. Technology means exploration of how our tools work within the world. Engineering is the exploration of how to build our future, and art is critical engagement with that future. But math is where I have a huge problem. I don't think we should be teaching math the way we do, and I don't think we should be teaching math as a subject. And I want to prompt everyone to think about what we mean by math. What do we mean when we say kids need to learn math? Do we mean math as the manipulation of numbers, equations, and expressions, or do we mean math as logic and systems, irrelevant to those numbers? Because math has an aura, and when we think of math a certain way, we think of it as the word problems that we've all seen as as teenagers. There's a pizza. The pizza has a diameter of 8 inches. How many square inches of pizza do I have? And this is not a helpful way to think about math or identify those skills in people who can potentially be good at programming.
And there's actually a correlation between math, reading, and reading skills across sexes. The gist of it is that gender equality is positively correlated with girls' mathematic achievement. So the study was conducted across 15 years in 33 countries, and any instances where girls or the gender equality is more, there are more markers of gender equality. They girls perform much better at mathematics.
Yeah. Okay.
And like, this really goes to how we're looking for markers and how we look for them in this way and teach people based on that. So what I want to propose instead is, instead of STEAM, to do STEAL, STEAL. And the L stands for language and logic. So language being conveying ideas, communication, and instruction, and logic is analyzing how systems interplay. I propose we use math as a tool because that's how I learned to come into math. I always thought that I was bad at math and I had no real reason to think that, and it turns out that I'm actually quite good at math. Programming can be either. Programming can be about logic and navigating systems, or it can be about math, but it doesn't have to be. In fact, I often use programming to not have to do math. It's very good at doing small equations for me, and even really complex equations for me. It's more about knowing when to use those equations. Claiming math is both logic and math. Claiming that code is both math and logic is misleading and creates double barriers in an already gendered field. The first time I learned that math was going to be useful to me is when I was in my undergrad, and I had a picture of the Earth, and I wanted to put news articles floating around it in a piece of code that navigated the internet. For some reason, I thought this was a good idea. This is where my slides would come really in handy. I wanted to place a circle on the other circle, and the first one was very easy. I did simple addition, and then I did subtraction to place the inverse of that circle, scale infinitely, and all of a sudden I realized that I wasn't applying math the way I was taught. I was trained to think of trigonometry as this thing that it wasn't, and trained to be scared of it, and trained that it was irrelevant to my practice. And now that I've overcome that, I've realized how I can imbue math inside my practice, and how I could teach math as a tool. So using it to support the other elements of STEAM, but not and as a way of navigating those elements inside my practice, and how I could teach math as a tool. So using it to support the other elements of STEAM, but not and as a way of navigating those elements. I basically would like to call everyone to use conscious education to overcome unconscious bias. Stop asking people to look for math markers if we can't even agree on what mathematics is. If we want people to teach logically, tell them that. Tell them to learn how to navigate the world and to think laterally and solve problems. We also live in an age now where we can use Google to find out everything about trig. I didn't go back and open up my textbooks. I Googled how to find a point on a circle, and that's how I was able to do it. And by using these different markers, we're going to be able to teach education, teach math and code in a way that doesn't create so many barriers based on the gendered biases we have to looking for people who are good at code. And then we can start having our voices within the fabric of games, and not only on the surface, and not only philosophically, but to take things apart and be able to write, to take existing pieces of code and use them for our own purposes. So, yeah, that's it.
Hey, Limbot, I'm putting you let's see if I can put you on video just for the a minute or two. And just, I don't think we have time because I think the new panel is coming through, but if we have one question, maybe? Anyone have one question? Okay, so we don't. Can you send me your presentation and I'll tweet it? Okay, great.
All right.
Thank you. Sorry about all of that.
Yeah.
Okay. And you got stuck again, so. One day we'll have a better system. So, our next panel starting here is race and culture in video game, I believe. And there's another player agency English session at, I believe, 4:30. Alex will also be there. And it will be in room 816. So, thank you very much.